The Lokasenna begins with the gathering of the gods. Aegir, who was also called Geimir, had prepared ale for the gods after he had got the mighty kettle, as now has been told. To this feast came Odin and Frigg his wife. Thor came not, as he was on journey in the east. Sif, Thor's wife, was there, and Bragi with Idun his wife. Tyr, who had but one hand, was there. The wolf Fenrir had bitten off his other hand when they had bound him. There was Njord and Skadi his wife, Freyr and Freya, and Vidar the son of Odin. Loki was there, and Freyr's servants, Bigvir and Bela. Many were there of the gods and elves. Before we continue with the full text of the Lokasenna, you should know that all these drawings were created by hand with brush and ink, all inspired by the Old Norse poem, the Lokasenna, from the Poetic Edda, specifically the Bellows translation from 1923. The full text in both English and Old Norse, complete with all the drawings you see, have been collected into a cloth-bound hardback book called the Illustrated Lokasenna. If you'd like one, check the link in the notes. We pick up our story in the hall of Aegir. Aegir had two serving men, Fumafang and Eldir. Glittering gold they had in place of firelight. The ale came in of itself, and great was the peace. The guests praised much the ability of Aegir's serving men. Loki might not endure that, and he slew Fimafang. Then the gods shook their shields and howled at Loki and drove him away to the forest, and thereafter set to drinking again. Loki turned back. This, of course, sets the scene for the Lokasenna, as Loki turns back to go into the gathering and give all of those gods and elves a piece of his mind. Loki turned back, and outside he met Eldir. Loki spoke to him. "Speak now, Eldir, for not one step farther shalt thou fare. What ale-talk here do they have within, the sons of the glorious gods?" Eldir spoke. "Of their weapons they talk, and their might in war, the sons of the glorious gods. From the gods and elves who are gathered here, no friend in words shalt thou find." Loki says, "In shall I go, into Aegir's hall, for the feast I fain would see. Bale and hatred I bring to the gods, and their mead with venom I mix." We can see by Loki's words here that he has ill intent right from the beginning. He is a snake moving amongst the other gods, ready to strike, but at least so far to strike just with his words, with his speech, with his tongue. Loki continues to speak with Eldir, the guard outside Aegir's hall. Eldir responds to Loki. "If in thou goest to Aegir's hall, and fain the feast would see, and with slander and spite would sprinkle the gods, think well lest they wipe it on thee." Loki responds, "Bethink thee, Eldir, if thou and I shall strive with spiteful speech, richer I grow in ready words, if thou speakest too much to me." This ink drawing is called Spiteful Speech, and it shows the back and forth between Loki and Eldir. Then Loki went into the hall, but when they who were there saw who had entered, they were all silent. Loki spoke. "Thirsty I come into this thine hall, I lopped from a journey long, to ask of the gods that one should give fair mead for a drink to me." I personally like to imagine Loki barging in, opening his arms and saying, "Ta-da! I'm here." Just imagine the faces the gods must have made. After entering the hall, Loki challenges the gods who are silent. Loki says, "Why sit ye silent, swollen with pride, ye gods, and no answer give? At your feast a place and a seat prepare me, or bid me forth to fare." I imagine the gods looking on silent, in particular Odin, as he considers what is going to happen here, as he stares over his shoulder, trying to figure out what exactly is going to come from Loki's drunken outbursts. At this point in the Lokasenna, Bragi steps up to speak, challenging Loki after he's barged in on the gods. Bragi says, "A place and a seat will the gods prepare, no more in their midst for thee, for the gods know well what men they wish to find at their mighty feasts." There's not a lot of visual information about Bragi or how he's supposed to look, so I've chose to put him in armor covered in songbirds and with instruments throughout as well, hence the harp shoulder pad there. This ink blob deals with the old concept of blood brotherhood, when two warriors would share their blood to create a bond. And this verse talks about the blood brotherhood between Odin and Loki, which should be noted, the Lokasenna is actually the only set of poems from the Viking times that is available now that suggests that Odin and Loki were blood brothers. We're at the point in the Lokasenna just after Bragi, god of poetry, has challenged Loki. In response, Loki says, "Remember, Odin, in olden days that we both our blood have mixed. Then didst thou promise no ale to pour, unless it were brought for us both." Odin and Loki are often friends in the stories, so them being blood brothers is far from a stretch. Lokasenna verse 10 has to do with the wolf's father, the wolf, of course, being Fenris, and the wolf's father being Loki. In our last verse, Loki reminded Odin that they were blood brothers. In response, Odin says, "Stand forth then, Vidar, and let the wolf's father find a seat at our feast, lest evil should Loki speak aloud here within Aegir's hall." Vidar is significant because that's Odin's son and the god of vengeance that will kill Fenris at the end of time. So in this space, while Odin is inviting Loki into the hall with the other gods, there's a bit of ominous weight hanging over them all, for Vidar will kill his son. The tension here in Aegir's hall has begun to rise, and it's only going to get more interesting as we move forward. Lokasenna, verse 11. Then Vidar arose and poured drink for Loki, but before he drank, he spoke to the gods. "Hail to you, gods, ye goddesses, hail! Hail to the holy throng, save for the god who yonder sits, Bragi there on the bench." With over 10 years of crafting images based around Norse mythology, the Lokasenna is an interesting opportunity to return to characters that I've painted or drawn before. In this case, Loki is speaking with Bragi, and so I decided to have Bragi's look based on a painting I did years ago called Bragi's Tongue. In verse 12 of the Lokasenna, Bragi speaks, having been challenged by Loki not a moment before. Bragi speaks, "A horse and a sword from my hoard will I give, and a ring gives Bragi to boot. That hatred thou makest not amongst the gods, so rouse not the great ones to wrath." Loki responds, "In horses and rings thou shalt never be rich, Bragi, but both shall you lack. Of the gods and elves here together met, least brave in battle art thou, and shyest thou art of the shot." Bragi replies, "Now were I without, as I am within, and here in Aegir's hall, thine head would I bear in mine hands away, and pay thee the price of thy lies." Loki answers, "In thy seat thou art bold, not so are thy deeds. Bragi, adorner of benches, go out and fight if angered thou feelest. No hero such forethought has." Bragi and Loki have been bickering when Bragi's wife, Idunn, steps in hopes of stopping them. Idunn is most well known for keeping the golden apples of immortality that keep the gods young and strong. Lokasenna, verse 16, Idunn speaks, "Well, prithee, Bragi, his kinship weigh, since chosen as wish-son he was, and speak not to Loki such words of spite, here within Aegir's hall." What's interesting about Idunn's approach here is that first, she is challenging Loki by saying that Bragi was chosen as wish-son, But then she also tells Bragi not to speak spitefully to Loki because, after all, they're at a party. There's a host. It's Aegir's hall. All of that would be rude. In verse 17, Loki responds, "Be silent, Idun. Thou art, I say, of women most lustful in love, since thou thy washed bright arms didst wind about thy brother's slayer." Now, one aspect that's interesting in the Lokasenna is that Loki numerous times refers to the various sins of the gods and goddesses that he chastises them for, but in this case, we don't know who Iduna's brother was, much less who killed him, a secret lost to time. In verse 18 of the Lokasenna, Idun speaks to Loki. She says, "To Loki I speak not with spiteful words, here within Aegir's hall. And Bragi I calm, who is hot with beer, for I wish not fierce they should fight." There's not a lot of stories from Norse lore where Idun gets so many speaking parts, and so it's interesting that here she tries to be the voice of reason, appealing both to her husband and to Loki's drunkenness and words that they might regret. Idun is most famous for the golden apples that keep the gods young, so here I have her wearing an antlered crown with those apples. How do you find a goddess lost to time? With ink blobs and imagination, I try. Her name is Gefn. There's just so little on her. In the Prose Edda by Snorri, he says that Gefn is served by women who died maidens. Beyond that reference, in the Poetic Edda, specifically the Lokasenna, is the main place we see Gefn and hear her speak. In Lokasenna verse 19, she steps forward to defend Idun. Gefn says, "Why ye gods twain with bitter tongues raise hate among us here? Loki is famed for his mockery foul, and the dwellers in heaven he hates." With those words and a few more verses, that is all we have to go on. Hopefully, as our gaze looks backwards to find Gefn, we'll see her looking back at us. In Lokasenna verse 20, Loki says, "Be silent, Gefn, for now shall I say who led thee to evil life. The boy so fair gave a necklace bright, and about him thy leg was laid." Now, beyond the general statement on Gefn's honor, there's very little known about this incident. There's a lot of confusion here between some of the different gods and goddesses, and it's been suggested that Gefn may really be Frigg, although Freya is the goddess known for having a necklace that she slept with a group of dwarves in order to obtain, called Brising. Like many aspects of Norse lore, this is also lost to time. In verse 21 of the Lokasenna, Odin steps forward to defend Loki's attack on Gefn. Odin says, "Mad art thou, Loki, and little of wit, the wrath of Gefn to rouse, for the fate that is set for all she sees, even as I, methinks." Now, once again, this is interesting and brings even more confusion into the role of Gefn because there are other parts of the lore that suggest that Frigg, Odin's wife, is the one who sees or knows as many secrets as Odin does. Nonetheless, here we are in the Lokasenna talking about Gefn and her sight. What might she see for us all? In verse 22 of the Lokasenna, Loki says, "Be silent, Odin. Not justly thou settest the fate of the fight among men. Oft gavest thou to him who deserved not the gift, to the baser the battle's prize." Now Loki brings up something that the Old Norse people also questioned Odin for. As god of battle, he was responsible for those dying who didn't deserve it, and for those winning battles that also might not be deserving of the battle's prize. Odin was generally considered a fickle god, and this shows here. And so we come to Odin's gift, which is to say, death. In verse 23, Odin continues his debate with Loki, who just accused Odin of killing the wrong men in battle. Odin responds, "Though I gave to him who deserved not the gift, to the baser the battle's prize, winters 8 wast thou under the earth, milking the cows as a maid. Aye, and babies did thou bear, unmanly thy soul must seem. The Lokasenna is the only reference to Loki having spent 8 years as a milkmaid under the earth, but there are numerous references to him turning into a female horse and giving birth to the 8-legged steed Sleipnir. While the Vikings might think Loki is unmanly, I doubt he cares, though Loki acting as a milkmaid is too funny not to draw. Verse 24, Loki responds to Odin's accusation that Loki is unmanly for birthing babies and working as a milkmaid. Loki says, "They say that with spells in Samsey once, like witches with charms did thou work, and in witches' guise amongst men didst go, unmanly thy soul must seem." Odin is known to have learned all forms of magic, including magic reserved for women. It's not surprising that he would need to dress in the ritual garb of an Old Norse witch. In the Viking Age, dressing in women's clothing was unmanly, making Odin's claim that Loki is unmanly a lot less pointed. Having heard more than enough from both of them, Odin's wife and queen of the gods, Frigg, tries to speak reason to them both. In verse 25 of the Lokasenna, Frigg says, "Of the deeds ye two of old have done, ye should make no speech among men. Whatever ye have done in days gone by, old tales should never be told." The theme of secret knowledge appears often from Frigg, even in other sources, and it generally seems that she was far better than her husband Odin at keeping secrets away from her own lips. In verse 26 of the Lokasenna, Loki says, "Be silent, Frigg, thou art Fjorgyn's wife, but ever lustful in love. For Vili and Ve, thou wife of Vithrir, both in thy bosom have lain." Fjorgyn and Vithrir are names for Odin, and Vili and Ve are Odin's brothers. So the verse reads, "Be silent, woman, you are ever lustful, you slept with Odin's brothers." This is Loki's favorite tactic throughout the poem when dealing with the goddesses. He calls their sexual misadventures into question. In verse 27 of the Lokasenna, Frigg says, "If a son like Balder were by me now, here within Aegir's hall, from the sons of the gods thou shouldest go not forth, till thy fierceness in fight were tried." Balder is dead, but who did it? We know who did it. Frigg knows who did it. And she's letting Loki know that if the other men in the hall find out, then they will punish the murderer. Like most things in Norse lore, Loki is, of course, responsible. In verse 28 of the Lokasenna, Loki says, "Thou wilt then, Frigg, that further I tell of the ill that now I know. Mine is the blame that Balder no more thou seest ride home to the hall." As far as I'm aware, Loki never admits to being the cause of Balder's death, making the Lokasenna a special case. In his drunken state, Loki actually admits to his crime, almost as if to dare the other gods to react. And react they will. Appalled by his behavior, Freya, another goddess, steps up to defend her queen Frigg. Freya says, "Mad art thou, Loki, that known thou makest the wrong and shame thou hast wrought. The fate of all does Frigg know well, though herself she says it not." Here you can see another place in the lore that highlights Frigg's knowledge and also her ability to keep a secret. As keeper of the keys in Asgard, Frigg likely saw much, and those of her household would value her discretion greatly. In response, Loki hits back. "Be silent, Freya, for fully I know thee. Sinless thou art not thyself. Of the gods and elves who are gathered here, each one as thy lover has lain." Freya is the most beautiful of the Norse goddesses, and often is sought as a prize, but she just as often uses her sexuality to get what she wants. According to Loki, she not only slept around a bit, but had her way with all the gods and elves gathered in the hall. Throughout the Lokasenna, this is Loki's favorite tactic when dealing with outspoken goddesses. He calls out her sexual exploits, and it works with most of the goddesses. But will it work with Freya? Not to be humbled, Freya lashes out quickly with her response. In verse 31, Freya says, "False is thy tongue, and soon shalt thou find that it sings thee an evil song. The gods are wroth, and the goddesses all, and in grief shalt thou homeward go." Grabbing Loki by the tongue, Freya points out that Loki is outnumbered and pissing everyone off. If he doesn't shut up, he's going to have a really bad end to his day. In verse 32, Loki continues to speak out against Freya, who challenged him in the last verse. Loki says, "Be silent, Freya, thou foulest witch, and steeped full sore in sin. In the arms of thy brother the bright gods caught thee, when Freya her wind set free." Now the Lokasenna is the only place that refers to a relationship between Freya and her twin brother, Freyr, although the twins are a product of such a union between their parents. Loki again calls out the hypocrisy of the gods, or perhaps he's lying. What do you think? In verse 33 of the Lokasenna, we hear from Njord, god of the sea, and father of Freya and Freyr, whom Loki called out as lovers in the last verse. Njord says, "Small ill does it work, though a woman may have a lord or a lover both. But a wonder it is that this womanish god comes hither, though babes he has borne." Famously, Loki gave birth to Odin's 8-legged horse, Sleipnir. In verse 34 of the Lokasenna, Loki says something so foul about Njord, who is god of rivers and seas, that I honestly can't believe it. Loki says, "Be silent, Njord, thou wast eastward sent, to the gods as a hostage given, and the daughters of Hymir their privy had, when use did they make of thy mouth." Hold up. Loki says these giant daughters used Njord's mouth as a privy? In case you don't know, a privy is another word for toilet, so you know, the god of rivers had some golden rivers flow into his mouth, at least according to Loki. Njord says, "Great was my gain, though long was I gone, to the gods as a hostage given. The son did I have whom no man hates, and foremost of gods is found." The son, whom no man hates, is of course Freyr, the god associated with kingship, male fertility, prosperity, and good harvest. With so much going for him, it's easy to see why Njord brings up his son as the best thing about him. In verse 36 of the Lokasenna, Njord, god of the sea, finds himself Loki's target. Loki says, "Give heed now, Njord, nor boast too high. No longer I hold it hid. With thy sister hadst thou so fair a son. Thus hadst thou no worse a hope." Njord's sister was the earth goddess Nerthus, and indeed the divine twins did give birth to another set of twins, Freya and Freyr. In verse 37, the god Tyr steps forward to defend Loki's slanderous remarks about Freyr and his father Njord. Tyr says, "Of the heroes brave is Freyr the best, here in the home of the gods. He harms not maids, nor the wives of men, and the bound from their fetters he frees." Freyr's reputation as a hero is strong. So strong that in some areas he was considered the king of the gods, not Odin. Apparently, this mighty reputation includes the ability for Freyr to break the bonds of those who are shackled, setting men free. As the Lokasenna project continues, we come to verse 38, where Loki speaks. "Be silent, Tyr, for between two men friendship thou ne'er could fashion. Fain would I tell how Fenrir once thy right hand rent from thee." This is a reference to the story where the gods bound the ever-growing wolf Fenrir using dwarven-made magic cord. Fenrir suspected the gods, so Tyr offered to place his right hand in Fenrir's mouth. When it became clear that the gods would not free Fenrir, the great wolf took Tyr's hand. In verse 39 of the Lokasenna, Tyr responds, "My hand do I lack, but Hrothvitnir thou, and the loss brings longing to both. Ill fares the wolf, who shall ever await in fetters the fall of the gods." Hrothvitnir means the mighty wolf. Tyr is saying that the mighty wolf waits until Ragnarok, when the wolf will escape and kill Odin, only to be avenged when Vidar kills Fenrir. In addition to chaining Fenrir, the gods also placed a sword in the wolf's mouth, preventing him from being able to close it. What Loki claims involves Tyr's wife, a goddess we have no record of. We don't even know her name. Loki says, "Be silent, Tyr, for a son with me thy wife once chanced to win. Not a penny methinks wast thou paid for the wrong, nor wast righted an inch, poor wretch." Loki claims that Tyr's wife tried to have a son with Loki. If you trust Loki, then that's quite the story to go missing from the rest of Norse mythology. Freyr's name means Lord, and he is loved by both gods and men. He speaks rarely in the Lokasenna, but after Loki suggests that the one-handed god Tyr's wife tried to have a son with Loki, Freyr has heard enough. In verse 41, Freyr speaks, "By the mouth of the river the wolf remains, till the gods to destruction go. Thou too shalt soon, if thy tongue is not stilled, be fettered, thou forger of ill." This is a reference to Fenrir, who is bound and had a sword placed in his mouth, causing Fenrir to drool, which creates a great river. Freyr is threatening Loki that if he doesn't shut up, Loki will be bound beneath the earth, just like the mighty wolf, Fenrir. In verse 42 of the Lokasenna, Loki responds, "The daughter of Geimir with gold didst thou buy, and sold thy sword to boot. But when Muspel's sons through Mirkwood ride, thou shalt weaponless wait, poor wretch." The daughter of Geimir is Freyr's bride, who was so beautiful that he traded his magic dancing sword for her hand in marriage. Freyr will therefore be weaponless at Ragnarok, when the sons of Muspel, aka the fire giants, will attack, and Freyr will be the first god to die. Is the love of a beautiful woman worth such a death? For this next story, you need to know that the Norse god Freyr had a servant named Bigvir. There is very little in the lore about Bigvir. In fact, he only appears in the Lokasenna. Bigvir's name means barley, which would connect to Freyr's general vibe as a god of prosperity, as barley is both useful for food and drink. Angry at what Loki said to his master, Bigvir speaks up in verse 43 of the Lokasenna. "Had I a birth so famous as Freyr, and sat in so lofty a seat, I would crush to marrow this croaker of ill, and beat his body to bits." This is pure fantasy, where a servant imagines coming to save the day. While we can admire Bigvir's wishful thinking, we will soon learn what he's actually good at. Unshaken, Loki quickly destroys Freyr's servant. In verse 44 of the Lokasenna, Loki says, "What little creature goes crawling there, snuffling and snapping about? At Freyr's ears ever wilt thou be found, or muttering hard at the mill." The phrase, muttering hard at the mill, means doing servant's work. Loki is saying that Bigvir is all talk, no action, and is also outclassed and should be silent in the presence of those who are higher status than him, and to Loki's mind, better than him. In verse 45 of the Lokasenna, Bigvir says, "Bigvir my name, and nimble am I, as gods and men do grant, and here am I proud that the children of Hropt together all drink ale." Hropt is another name for Odin. Bigvir is bragging that he's fast and proud to be in Odin's hall with the other gods and goddesses. Obviously, Loki won't just let this servant's bragging go unchallenged, but that'll be in the next verse. In verse 46 of the Lokasenna, Loki says, "Be silent, Bigvir, thou never couldst set their shares of the meat for men. Hid in straw on the floor they found thee not, when heroes were fain to fight." The Lokasenna is the only reference we have to Loki's claim that Bigvir is a coward. Perhaps it is this exact lack of evidence that proves Loki's point, or perhaps this is just another mystery about Norse mythology lost to time. In verse 47 of the Lokasenna, Heimdall, the watcher of the gods, speaks up in an attempt to get Loki to see reason. Heimdall says, "Drunk art thou, Loki, and mad are thy deeds. Why, Loki, leavest thou this not? For drink beyond measure will lead all men no thought of their tongues to take. This sort of advice from over 1,000 years ago is still valid today. How many of us have gotten too drunk and said things we regret? Sure, our technology is different, but we are still just as human as those who came before us. Hopefully, Loki listens to Heimdall's wisdom, but I doubt it. Heimdall is the watcher of the Norse gods. He is known for the great horn he will blow to herald the start of Ragnarok, the last battle, but he is also connected to the ram, an animal known for its horns. Heimdall placed his ear in the well of wisdom, the same well where Odin placed his eye. This enhances Heimdall's hearing to spread throughout the 9 realms. In verse 48 of the Lokasenna, Loki tries to silence Heimdall. Loki says, "Be silent, Heimdall. In days long since was an evil fate for thee fixed. With back held stiff, must thou ever stand as warder of heaven to watch." I know Loki's trying to cut down Heimdall, but it just makes him sound cool. The phrase warder of heaven is so beautifully evocative. In honor of that, I wanted to make a drawing that showed off how cool Heimdall is. Loki's punishment is well known, and in verses 49 and 50 of the Lokasenna, the goddess Skadi has a little back and forth with Loki. As we approach the end of the Lokasenna, things get much more heated. Skadi says, "Light art thou, Loki, but longer thou mayest not in freedom flourish thy tail. On the rocks the gods bind thee with bowels torn forth from thy frost-cold sun." Loki responds, "Though on rocks the gods bind me with bowels torn from my frost-cold sun, I was first and last at the deadly fight there where Thiazi we caught." This refers to Loki's punishment by taking him beneath the earth and killing his normal son and using the entrails to bind Loki to rocks. Loki's response mentions the giant Thiazi, who was killed by the gods, causing Skadi to seek payment for her father's death. In Norse myth, Skadi is a giantess who becomes a goddess. Thor and crew killed her father, the giant Thiazi, after which she went to Asgard to demand payment from the gods for her father's death. This long tale ends with Skadi married to Njord, god of the sea, at which point she joins the Norse pantheon as a goddess. Skadi is goddess of winter, hunting, and skiing, but many also consider her a goddess of feminine vengeance. That is how Skadi speaks in verse 51 of the Lokasenna, with vengeance towards Loki. Skadi says, "Wert thou first and last at the deadly fight, there where Thiazi was caught, from my dwellings and fields shall ever come forth a cold counsel for thee." And that's also the name of this drawing, Cold Counsel. In verse 52 of the Lokasenna, Loki reveals a spicy bit of hot gossip. Loki says, "More lightly thou spakest with Laufey's son when thou badest me come to thy bed. Such things must be known if now we two shall seek our sins to tell." Laufey is Loki's mother, so Laufey's son is Loki. He's saying that Skadi asked him to go to bed. This explains why Skadi sees Loki's bad behavior as a very personal betrayal. Thor's wife is Sif, famous for her golden hair. In the ancient Viking poem called the Lokasenna, Loki has been airing the gods' dirty laundry. In particular, he's been calling out the various goddesses for their infidelity. Many such infidelities have been with Loki as the other participant. All this talk has made Sif nervous, so in verse 53 of the Lokasenna, Sif came forward and poured mead for Loki in a crystal cup and said, "Hail to thee, Loki, and take thou here the crystal cup of old mead. For me at least, alone of the gods, blameless thou knowest to be." It is glaring that she chooses this specific moment to come forward and pour Loki a drink. The last thing he needs right now is another drink. She also leans in hard by saying how blameless she's known to be. Do you think Sif is blameless? or is she covering for some past deed? In verse 54, Loki responds, "He took the horn, and drank therefrom. Alone thou wert, if truly thou wouldest all men so shyly shun. But one do I know full well, methinks, who had thee from Lorthi's arms, Loki, the crafty in lies." Hlorthi is another name for Thor. Loki is claiming that he and Sif had an affair. This is particularly interesting because of another story where Loki cuts off Sif's hair and had it replaced with magic dwarven golden hair. In Old Norse custom, a woman found to be unfaithful had her hair cut and had to endure the scorn of those to see her with short hair. Between that old story and what Loki said today, it makes one wonder if Sif and Loki did indeed share an intimate moment. At this point, he has called out all the gods and goddesses gathered in the hall, all save one god who was notably absent at the start of our story. In verse 55 of the Lokasenna, a servant named Bela issues a warning to Loki. Bela says, "The mountains shake, and surely I think from his home comes Hlorthi now. He will silence the man who is slandering here, together both gods and men." Hlorthi means loud rider, or loud weather god, and is another name for Thor. Bela is warning Loki that he had better stop before the god of thunder shows up and brings the pain. In the last verse, the servant Bela tried to warn Loki that Thor is on his way, and so Loki had better stop slandering all the gods and goddesses. In verse 56 of the Lokasenna, Loki says, "Be silent, Bela. Thou art Bigvir's wife, and deep art thou steeped in sin. A greater shame to the gods came never. Befouled thou art with thy filth." Bela and Bigvir don't appear in any other lore outside the Lokasenna. All we really know is that they are Freyr's servants. This is yet another bit of lost lore from Norse myth. What we do know is that Loki doubled down on calling folks out, just in time for thunder to sound nearby. In verse 57, Thor shows up late to the party. "Then came Thor forth and spoke. Unmanly one, cease, or the mighty hammer Mjolnir shall close thy mouth. Thy shoulder cliff shall I cleave from thy neck, and so shall thy life be lost." Mjolnir is Thor's famous hammer, and he's pretty clear about what he plans to do with Loki. Crafting this image from ink blobs to traditional ink drawing, I show Mjolnir featuring Thor at the top and his two goats at the bottom, an image I call the Mighty Hammer. In verse 58, Loki replies to Thor by saying, "Lo, in has come the son of Earth. Why threaten so loudly, Thor? Less fierce thou shalt go to fight the wolf when he swallows Sigfather up." I'm not exactly sure what Loki's tactic is here. Perhaps he's trying to humble Thor by pointing out that he will be unable to prevent Odin's death at Ragnarok when Fenrir, the great wolf, swallows the Allfather whole. Seems like Thor is not the kind of guy you want to make more angry, but maybe Loki knows something we don't. Or maybe he just can't stop running his mouth no matter how hard he tries. In verse 59 of the Lokasenna, Thor responds, "Unmanly one, cease, or the mighty hammer Mjolnir shall close thy mouth. I shall hurl thee up and out in the east, where men shall see thee no more." Thor has already threatened to take off Loki's head. Now he threatens to hurl him farther than the eye can see. I like to imagine Thor body slamming Loki like a professional wrestler. Not sure if Loki is able to take a hint, but Thor is clearly working himself into a frenzy. Thor just threatened to throw Loki farther than any man can see. In verse 60 of the Lokasenna, Loki responds, "That thou hast fared on the east road forth, to men shouldest thou say no more. In the thumb of a glove didst thou hide, thou great one, and there forgot thou wast Thor." This refers to a famous story where Loki and Thor both traveled through the giant lands. Along the way, they need to sleep and end up sleeping in a giant's glove. Throughout the tale, the giants get the best of Thor, and Loki for that matter, many, many times. Loki is reminding Thor that he too has moments of weakness, but it also seems like Loki is trying to remind Thor of their friendship. In verse 61 of the Lokasenna, Thor responds to Loki's reminder of weakness. Thor says, "Unmanly one, cease, or the mighty hammer Mjolnir shall close thy mouth. My right hand shall smite thee with Hrungnir's slayer, till all thy bones are broken." Hrungnir is a stone giant that Thor killed with his hammer, so Hrungnir's slayer is of course Mjolnir, Thor's famous hammer. Loki's got Thor so riled up he's just repeating, "I will hit you with my hammer, I will hit you with my hammer," again and again. However, Thor is still the strongest of the gods. Loki should watch out. In verse 62 of the Lokasenna, Loki again tries to remind Thor that he doesn't always win. Loki says, "Although time still do I think to live, though thou threatenest thus with thy hammer, rough seemed the straps of Skirmir's wallet, when thy meat thou mightest not get, and faint from hunger didst feel." Skirmir is a massive giant. While Loki, Thor, and his servants traveled with Skirmir, the giant put all their food into his wallet. The giant goes to sleep, and Thor tries to get the food, but he's not strong enough to get the wallet open. In a rage, Thor strikes the giant 3 times on the head, but he is undisturbed. Not exactly sure what Loki's tactic is at this point. Is he trying to piss Thor off or humble him? Not sure. Once again, Thor threatens Loki, which at this point in the Lokasenna has been going on for over 4 different verses. Thor says, "Unmanly one, cease, or the mighty hammer Mjolnir shall close thy mouth. The slayer of Hrungnir shall send thee to hell and down to the gate of death." That last line is what inspired this ink drawing, "down to the gate of death." My goal was to create a crazy mashup of elements, skeletons, giant skeletons, mist, the wolf Garm who guards hell, references to fallen soldiers, and whatever else might fit in the page, all surrounding the outline of Thor's hammer. Out of all the Lokasenna drawings, this one took the longest by far, but in the end, I think that effort really shows. We're finally at the end as we examine verses 64 and 65, where Loki says, "I have said to the gods and the sons of the god the things that whetted my thoughts, but before thee alone do I now go forth, for thou fightest well, I ween. Ale hast thou brewed, but Aegir now, such feast shalt thou make no more. O'er all that thou hast, which is here within, shall play the flickering flames, and thy back shall be burnt with fire." With Loki's dramatic exit, he points out that none of this matters because the world will burn at Ragnarok. That brings us to the epilogue of the Lokasenna, which is as follows. "And after that, Loki hid himself in Frenning's waterfall in the guise of a salmon, and there the gods took him. He was bound within the bowels of his son Vali, but his son Narfi was changed to a wolf. Skadi took a poison snake and fastened it up over Loki's face, and the poison dropped thereon. Sigyn, Loki's wife, sat there and held a shell under the poison, but when the shell was full, she bore away the poison, and meanwhile the poison dropped on Loki. Then he struggled so hard that the whole earth shook there within, and now that is called an earthquake." And that concludes the Lokasenna. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed the story and the art, the Illustrated Lokasenna is a book. You can find a link to the Kickstarter or to the Fateful Signs website down in the notes, where you can get your very own copy of the book either by supporting the Kickstarter now or with a late pledge after December 11th, 2025. At some point in the distant future, you can purchase the book from FatefulSigns.com directly. Thank you.